right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with our dyes, which are the food dyes. And what we're gonna do is we're going to put this dye onto the chromatography strip so that we can watch it diffuse through the strip and see how far does it travel based on the size. Now the directions here are a little confusing because they want you to do some stuff, but I have an easier way to do this. So what you're gonna do is those micro pipettes that you cut earlier, what you're gonna have is this little end right here. This is kind of your micro pipetter. So what we can do here is you're gonna take your 3 strips, one for the red dye, one for the yellow dye, and one for the blue dye. And what you're gonna do, what you can do, is you can just open up your food dye container. You'll see it's a little dropper. So what I like to do is I like to insert my dropper into the opening, give it a little squeeze, and you'll see that the food dye comes up into the pipette. Okay. Now you'll see some of it is maintained in the tip. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to my chromatography strip. I'm gonna dab it on the line right above the narrow tip of my chromatography strip. So what it should look like is this. So you'll see there's the sort of funnel end, and then you'll see that my dye is now on my starting point, or that 1.5 centimeter line. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the yellow and the blue dye, but what you want to make sure is that you're using a new clean micro pipette tip for this. So same thing, I'm going to take my micro pipette tip, boop, I'm going to cut off that end. Then I'm going to take my food dye, you'll see there's a little nozzle, I'm going to insert this in and I'm going to squeeze the food dye. You'll notice some is retained in the tip. And then I'm going to put that onto my edge and dab until capillary action pulls it through. Okay. Now again, you want to do this for your 3 dyes. Okay. And what we're going to do is once we're done dabbing them onto the chromatography strip, then what we will do is we will let them dry. And once they're dried, I will show you how to set up the actual chromatography part. So again, got my yellow dye. I'm going to insert my pipette. I'm going to squeeze the dye. You'll see it's retained in the tip. I'm going to now dab that onto my chromatography strip. Okay. So now you should see is 3 chromatography strips, each with a spot of dye on that leading edge. So I got my 3 strips with my 3 dots of dye, and then from there we can set up the chromatography setup, which I will show you next. All right, so for this next part, what you're gonna need is your test tube rack, 3 of the polystyrene test tubes, the regular pipette, so this is not the micro pipette, this is the one that we got from our chemical equipment set 1. We're gonna need your chromatography strips, and we're also going to need these little straight pins, and these straight pins were attached to the food dye, okay? So here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna take your 3 test tubes and insert them into your test tube rack, and then you're gonna take your dropper and you're gonna add 20 drops of sodium chloride to each test tube. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay, and you'll do that to the other 3. Now, once you've added the salt water, now what we're going to do is we're going to add our chromatography strip. So the way that you're going to do this is you're going to take your pins, so your straight pins here, and be careful, they are sharp. And they can be a little bit hard to handle if you're wearing gloves. You're going to take one of your straight pins and you're going to take your chromatography strip like so. And what you're going to do is you're going to insert the pin through the top of the chromatography strip. So essentially, you're going to pierce it. So those of you that have gotten a piercing, same thing, right? So we're just going to jab that through, mind your fingers. So now we have is the chromatography strip hanging from the pin. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and drop that into the test tube with your salt water. And the pin will essentially hold it in place, okay? Now you are going to keep it as centered as you can, and you want to make sure, oh, and see, I just made a little error, which no problem, we can fix. So you want to put the pin through at the 9.4 mark, so through that pencil mark up at the top. Okay, and you're going to insert that into your strip. And then what you're going to do is you are going to leave that for 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, you are going to remove your chromatography strip and place it back on the paper towel. So after 15 minutes, we'll show you what it looks like, and then we'll go from there. All right, so now that your chromatography band have sat for 15 minutes, what you're gonna do is you're gonna pull it out of solution. And what you should see is something like this. So the dye has essentially smeared up the chromatography paper. Now what you're gonna do is you're gonna lay this down on your paper towel, and you're gonna measure the distance, you're gonna measure the distance that your dye has traveled from the band that you blotted on to the top. So from the 1.5 centimeter band to where the dye has ended on your chromatography strip, you're gonna measure that distance and you're gonna record it into your notebook. Now you're gonna repeat this procedure again with your blue and your yellow. So you're gonna pull it out, you're gonna measure how far the dye has traveled. And then you're gonna do the same thing, but with your Kool-Aid. You're gonna take 3 new chromatography strips. You're going to blot the Kool-Aid onto those strips. You're gonna add them to a test tube with 20 drops of sodium chloride, and you're gonna let it sit for 15 minutes. Once again, you'll measure how far the Kool-Aid strip has moved up the chromatography strip, and you're gonna compare that to the food dye to determine what colored dyes were in your Kool-Aid. And with that, you're done with the experiment. Now, in terms of cleanup, everything in this particular experiment can go down the sink. It's all non-toxic and all edible. And anything that you are done with, like chromatography strips, can all be thrown in the trash.